Yeah, if I'm honest, I hadn't thought about it in quite the way you framed it until I listened to your podcast. So there's the benefit of
you said the right things.
Listening to you. No, but it's absolutely true. I think you're right. The amount of disposable income that they have is not the same as older people. But if there is insufficient attention paid to the position and the relevance and the awareness, then one risks kind of shrinking to success. I mean, I am on the record of saying that I see my role as children, people, money in that order, and at least 40% of my time is engaged with activity that is directly or indirectly associated with fundraising. You will wake up in the middle of the night and you will worry that not enough people are riding their bikes from London to Brighton or throwing themselves out of aeroplanes, because at the end of the day the NSPCC can do nothing if it doesn't raise enough money.
Well, hello, we're back again as promised. And today we've got our first very special guest, and we've probably got, I suppose we're at one of the cornerstones of the UK, charitable sector, and certainly one of the cornerstones of the fundraising sector. Because for the first time in my life, I've come into Weston House in Shoreditch, and I've been allowed past the reception, and we're on the 5th floor of the NSPCC with the soon-to-be departing chief executive, Sir Peter Wanless, who is going to talk to us today about how a CEO manages the fundraising function. What's good, what's bad, what are the problems, and alongside that, hopefully he'll tell us a few interesting stories about being a CEO as well. And I am also with, as ever, my co-conspirator in the world of podcasting, Giles. Would you like to say hello, Giles, to our...
Hello audience, and hello Sir Peter. It's good to see you again.
Hi Giles.
Congratulations on the night.
Oh, thank you very much.
Well deserved.
Try not to think about it too much.
Indeed. And Sir Peter, hello to you.
Thank you. It's lovely to welcome you here to the mothership in trendy Shoreditch, and you'll have come past Childline on your way in, and we'll have had volunteers there taking calls and contacts from children and young people even as we speak. So charity in action.
To kick off before the things start, this is the first time we've met. I don't really know that much about you. We had a little chat about pop music before, and we spoke about the Jam and Massive Attack, so I'm with some very fashionable down with the kids people here, but then they did move on to Bartok and the like. But can you give us a little bit about your background, because obviously you've had some pretty interesting positions. I think you were PPS to Michael Portillo at one point.
I was, yeah. My career has a logic when you look back at it, but when I was living it, I was really just trying to do things that I was interested in, working with engaging people and trying to make a difference. So if we work backwards, I've been at the NSPCC as the Chief Executive now for 11 years. Prior to that, I was the Chief Executive of what was then called the Big Lottery Fund. So that was distributing hundreds of millions of pounds to charities and community groups. What's not to like about that? And prior to that, I was a civil servant. So I did 10 years at the Department for Education in various guises, and was Director of Strategy and Communications in the education era of New Labour. And then I started my life, and I sometimes joke about this, that my heart is in the Treasury, in Her Majesty's Treasury, where I spent most of my 20s in private office working directly with government ministers. So yeah, John Major and Michael Portillo were the two that I worked most closely with.
And how did you get into that? How do you get down that path? Do you choose it? Or is it like fundraising? You stumble into it?
You stumble into it a bit. I mean, I always liked politics and international relations. That's what I did at university. Mm-hmm. Got a bit of a chip on my shoulder. I failed the fast stream entrance exams to the civil service. I was good on the kind of maths IQ questions, but the English ones required you to understand grammar, and at my local comprehensive school, they taught us how to write a really good story, but not really what the formal composition of a sentence was. So I kind of failed on that. But they said, you did okay, so we'll give you a non-graduate entry job to the civil service if you're interested. And at that point I had been given a job offer to work as a trainee manager at CNA in Bristol. But then I was offered this job at the Cabinet Office, which sounded incredibly glamorous, and I thought, do you know what? Notwithstanding my interest in shirts and fashion, I will join the Cabinet Office, thinking that I would be taking the minutes in Cabinet Office meetings. Turned out I was in a rather obscure bit of the Cabinet Office, which was responsible for personnel management of civil servants, which quite rapidly, in a machinery of government change, became part of the Treasury, and the rest is history.
And then you just hurtled up that pole. And how did you make the step, obviously from big lottery, to come wandering through these doors one day 11 and a half years ago?
Yeah, well, the first big step, I suppose, was to move out of government, which was very good to me and gave me a lot of responsibility at an early age. And it is fascinating thinking about system reform and using legislation and regulation and the allocation of resource to create an environment in which things may or may not be better for lots of people. But it's not the same as starting with the needs and realities of people who need help and support. And I became increasingly interested in making a difference for those that the system was failing. And so the lottery was a way of funding all sorts of activities, big and small, that could make a difference, were the things which people really wanted to do in their local areas. And in some ways I could have done that forever, because what's not to like about giving away hundreds of millions of pounds, except that you disappoint many more people than you fund. But it was one step removed from the real action, and children were my big kind of passion and cause, and I'd had these 10 years at the Department for Education. So when the headhunters came knocking and said, you know, NSPCC are looking for a leader, I thought, well, must have that conversation. And then as we explored it, it felt to me like actually the sort of leadership skills I had could be a really good fit for what the NSPCC wanted at that time. And the very last question they asked me in the final interview, and it was quite a competitive and tortuous process. The NSPCC's only ever had 12 chief executives in its entire history, so I didn't realise that at the time, but the stakes were quite high. The last question was, do you really want this job? And I thought, my goodness, I really, really do. And that was that. So that's how I found myself here. But as a chief executive who had 5 years CEO experience, but actually no professional experience in fundraising. In government, the taxes rolled in, at the lottery, the funding rolled in. All of a sudden, here I am in charge of an organisation which overwhelmingly depends on voluntary donations of one kind or another. So there was a lot to learn.
Mark, can I pick up on that? Sir Peter, you're recognised in the sector as being a great CEO. To what extent do you see yourself as a fundraiser? Are you a fundraiser?
I think I get fundraising. I'm not. I get it enough to know that it's an extremely important discipline that I wouldn't pretend to be a professional expert in. So although I said I had no fundraising experience when I came to the NSPCC, if I think back to my childhood, I used to love going around with my mum collecting the League of Light boxes for the National Children's Home and counting up the money and helping bank it. So there's something there that was deep in me that kind of respected and appreciated charity and fundraising. So I think of myself as a fundraiser, as a participant and an enabler, but I wouldn't pretend to be a fundraising expert.
Okay, but I wouldn't expect you to be a fundraising expert. But how much of your time do you spend like supporting fundraising? How much of your time do you spend meeting donors individually, in groups, writing letters, etc.?
A lot. Probably. I mean, it's difficult to put a figure on it because it varies at different times of the year, but I would say at least 40% of my time is engaged with activity that is directly or indirectly associated with fundraising. And as I came in to do this job, I went to see Mary Marsh, who was my predecessor but one. And I was full of ideas of the policies and the positioning and the difference which the NSPCC could make for children and young people, and couldn't wait to get started. And she was lovely and encouraging of that. But she said to me, "I just want to say one thing to you, Peter. You will wake up in the middle of the night and you will worry that not enough people are riding their bikes from London to Brighton or throwing themselves out of aeroplanes, because at the end of the day, the NSPCC can do nothing if it doesn't raise enough money." So that was an important piece of context. And so everything we do...
Just to interrupt, 40% is quite a lot, don't you think?
Yeah, I wouldn't know. I'm a novice at this area in terms I haven't worked at a charity for a long time. I was at the YMCA, but our CEO did not do very much fundraising.
I think there's a message there for appeal directors who are watching this. That, maybe not set an expectation of their CEOs to do 40% of their time on fundraising, but the fact that there is a CEO of a major charity who spends 40% of their time supporting fundraising is a fairly major thing.
Charities are different models, aren't they? And the NSPCC is exceptionally dependent on voluntary donations of one sort or another.
90%?
Yeah, between 80 and 90%, I would say. So it is vital, as Mary said, that you always have that in mind. At the same time, it's really important that you don't look like a money bag or a money-making machine. So most of my public profiling and positioning, and another 40% of what I'm doing, and actually where I spend most of my time, I would say, looking and leading, is shaping the vision and the priorities and the impact goals that we're seeking to achieve as a charity. So the NSPCC is really a transmission mechanism that sits between babies, children and young people in desperate need of help over here, and people over there, many of whom know already, but lots don't yet understand or appreciate the difference that they could make to making lives better for the babies, children and young people. And our privilege is to connect those up with one another as efficiently and effectively as we can. And my personal, I think, expertise and knowledge is closer, because of my background in kind of government and policy making and strategic positioning and marketing and this sort of stuff, looking at the positioning as opposed to the relationship management, income generation stuff that way. But they're both really important, and each depends on the other. But it might be that's why it's a bit surprising that quite so much time is spent on the fundraising, that what we want to talk about, what I want to talk about all the time, is not so much where the money's coming from, but the difference that the money's making.
But yes, but sorry. So you spend 40% of your time supporting fundraising, but your brain is focused on the impact that fundraising will make on children. That's a fabulous combination.
and I think that over time I have appreciated very much more how to have those conversations in an increasingly integrated fashion. Because if the NSPCC is going to be successful, it's really important that we ask ourselves, but not be dictated by, what are the income generating opportunities or the ways in which we can inspire many more people and organisations to come alongside us and give us support.
That's very serious. Can I ask you a personal question? What relationship is there between your taste in shirts and fundraising?
Well, the shirts have become a thing. So at the start of lockdown, I felt very detached from the rest of the organisation, and just to cheer everyone up, I found this ridiculous shirt, and I put it on, and I put a post on LinkedIn to say, at least when we're working from home we can wear our favourite clothes, and it was one of those posts that just went viral. And I put it on LinkedIn because LinkedIn's so sort of po-faced and serious, but it literally went viral, and so then I started wearing a different shirt every day through the lockdown. And you know, when you're thinking about fundraising, after a while I said, well, if we can raise £1,000, I'll keep this going. And it just sort of took off to the point where I think I ended up doing 60 or 70 shirts in a row. But now they have become a thing. Whenever I go to an event, you know, the supporters or even government ministers will either say, well, that's quite a shirt, or why are you wearing such a boring shirt? And we've taken some of the most horrendous ones, which I've sourced for about £7 from Hong Kong, and auctioned them for Childline for £300-400. So that's the relationship between my shirts and income generation.
They're part of the Sir Peter brand.
They are now.
Which is very good. Mark,
the point you were making just before we got onto the much more important topic of shirts, you were talking about the different ways that we can raise money and the different ways that you can engage. Yeah. How are you weighing that up? Because one of the lines that I love about yours is policy-based evidence making. Okay, that idea that what comes first? Are you coming up with a fundraising idea, or are you trying to prove that happens, or are you really focusing on what is going to generate the most money for you sustainably long term? How are you managing that when you know your fundraising team comes in and says, we've got this fabulous new idea, and how do you balance that?
Well, so I am not saying there's a right or wrong to this, but I am a vision and strategy led leader. So for me, you start with the difference that you want to make for children and young people. So our charitable purpose is preventing cruelty to children. Where at the moment is the system failing babies, children and young people, and where can the NSPCC, because of the way in which we're funded and the sorts of supporters which we can mobilise, best placed to make a distinct contribution different from what statutory services are obliged and required to deliver and other charities and businesses are developing. And at the moment I'm feeling very comfortable and confident that we've got 3 really clear impact goals that guide everything that we do. So everyone can play a part in keeping children safe, number 1. Online world should be as safe as the offline world, number 2. Children should be able to speak up and be heard and understood, number 3. And they're the first filter. Now within that there's a lot of opportunity to develop stories, create compelling examples of how people can join us on that journey. And even within there are questions about where we might go for the money. So we're overhauling and breathing new life into our professional learning services. So how might the NSPCC brand be exploited to raise a lot more money through the products and services we can make available to professionals? How do we create a sort of compelling sense that many more people can play a part in keeping children safe at a time when, to be honest, our cause and our issue is falling right down the pecking order. I mean,
why do you think that is the case?
Well, if you look at YouGov, there are lots of issues at the top which impact on children, but children aren't mentioned. So at the moment, as we go into the election, people talk about cost of living. They're talking about the state of the NHS. Those are both really big things which impact on children, but they're not seen through the prism of children's voice. So we've been joining up with the other children's charities to say, where are children's voices in all of this? Why are policymakers and people in the media not asking that question? So I think that is a failure of all of them, but it's also a failure of ours to have allowed children to come so far down the agenda. And it's a big issue, for charities like ours, that the spontaneous awareness of children's charities is nothing like where it used to be, and the international charities, as a consequence of probably some of the things which they've been doing themselves, but also the war in Ukraine, the Israel-Gaza situation, the huge awareness and visibility of cancer charities. There are a lot of incredibly important urgent causes which people can give their time and money to, and we need to kind of fight for children's attention within all of that.
Because I think what we're seeing, if we analyse what's happening in the sector, the percentage of people giving, and again there's lots of reasons for this, but obviously we've got the cost of living crisis, but the percentage of people giving are shrinking, and they're particularly shrinking at the younger end of the scale, so people in their 30s and 40s, and where the money really is the older donors, the 55 to 60 plus, and they tend to be giving more. The wealthier pensioners, which you might have seen us in our first meeting that Giles and I discussing, when we're both still in our prime.
Yeah.
Are you looking at that as a specific audience? Are you focusing on what can we do to bring that older, wealthier, time-rich group into the NSPCC, or perhaps even back? Maybe they gave to you at the time of full stop or something, and now they're ripe to return 20 years on.
Yeah, if I'm honest, I hadn't thought about it in quite the way you framed it until I listened to your podcast. So there's the benefit of
you said the right things.
Listening to you. No, but it's absolutely true. Our primary focus for activity and fundraising has been on parents and younger and new families, and because they are the ones who are, I think, most associated and emotionally invested in the cause, and that moment in life when you're about to have a family or other, young children that for the first time become really important. And this happened to me when I moved from the Treasury to the Department for Education and became a dad. All of a sudden, the game of politics had an incredible reality to it. So I think that there's a sweet spot and an important focus of attention for the NSPCC to associate that kind of relationship and build the connection with younger people in a systematic way. But I think you're right, the amount of disposable income that they have is not the same as older people. Now, we are fortunate in that the bedrock of the NSPCC's funding comes from a lot of people who are older, who are regular givers to us and have associated their legacy gifts with the NSPCC over a period of time, that listening to your last podcast made me feel we must redouble our efforts to understand and appreciate and value their loyalty and their commitment to our cause, because they are They are really important. They are the NSPCC family, if you like. We are nothing without them, and they are more able to give at the moment. So I think that whole retention piece is really important. But for the NSPCC to flourish, our spontaneous awareness is nothing like where it should be. We have got to create a compelling reason for more people to be thinking about babies, children and young people more than they are doing at the moment. And I think the more productive marketplace for that is your sort of 25 to 45 year olds.
One of the things that obviously you're doing here is you're balancing that fundraising work against your brand work and alongside your everything else. How are you balancing those budgets? You know, because obviously brand work is money years down the line. Fundraising, you know, is probably going to be a year or two down the line, you know, before that really starts coming. But you've got your work that you're doing now. You know, how are you balancing those in your yearly financials?
It's very difficult, and in times of particularly challenged financial budgets and situations, it is the longer term investment in the brand and positioning that suffers, and you can see that in the NSPCC's figures. I think we have concentrated more in the here and now for a period of time, and achieve significant impact for children in the here and now. But if there is insufficient attention paid to the position and the relevance and the awareness, then one risks kind of shrinking to success. And so that is a constant debate and discussion with the trustees about how do we both deliver and demonstrate enough impact in the here and now to be relevant and valuable, but invest in positioning and visibility to attract and retain the supporters of the future. And that's just a constant discussion.
May I take us back to
the shirts?
No, to direct fundraising. So you spend 40% of your time supporting fundraising. You won't do that off your own back. You'll be advised by Jo Swinhoe. I know Jo Swinhoe very well from my time at the NSPCC, and I know she's a great fundraiser. Now, a lot of people watching this are going to be fundraising directors and aspiring fundraising directors. And would you say, I'd like you to say something, probably as much as you can, about the relationship between the CEO and the appeals director, and what advice you would give to appeals directors listening about how to make their relationship with their CEO excellent.
I think that, so there's something which we've touched on already about money as a means to an end, not an end in itself. So try not to develop a kind of a reputation for simply raising money, and as much money as you can for the sake of it, but develop a language together that harnesses the value of funding to the difference that you are seeking to make. I think that's from my point of view and my perspective, that's the most important thing, because what's not to like about opportunities to generate money and sustain funding in pursuit of what it is we're seeking to achieve.
But I would suggest to you that when you talk about fundraising as a means to an end, I infer from that a slight diminishing of fundraising. That the key thing is what you're doing to help end cruelty to children, and fundraising is over there in the corner. It's the means to the end. And I don't believe that's what you meant.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I am on the record of saying that I see my role as children, people, money, in that order. And you've got to think about all of them all the time. So ultimately, children come first, their voices, their perspectives, the difference which you want and need to make to them is number one. Money is absolutely vital, because if we don't inspire and engage and generate the funds necessary to do what we want to achieve, we can't fulfill the sort of transmission mechanism. And then in the middle we've got our people, and sometimes the people issues can be a bit squeezed out, because the what we're trying to achieve is so inspiring that if you just go for money without thinking about the skills and capabilities of the people in the middle, that can be a problem as well. So within our people we have fundraisers who need, when things are working really well, feel central to that venture, feel inspired, feel valued, feel that their skills are appreciated, that they are developing and learning. They're not just coming to the NSPCC for a year to get the brand on their CV so they can go off in a hurry to somewhere else, but they're actually experiencing, you know, career development and the satisfaction of being part of something bigger. So I don't know if that answers. I don't want to.
No, it doesn't, Sir Peter. It doesn't. What I really want is for you to give some specific advice to the appeals directors working here about how they can make their relationship with their CEO as good as possible on a practical day-to-day basis.
Yeah, well, so I think I go back. My first point is illustrate how the generation of money will benefit the impact that we're seeking to achieve. Then what we've just sort of touching on there, illustrate how you can and will inspire and engage and develop your people to be valued and skilled and appreciated, not just in their own sort of self-worth but across the wider organisation. And then together the fundraising director and the CEO need to connect with the senior team more broadly, so that, you know, ultimately at the NSPCC, if we're working properly, everyone is a fundraiser. So without diminishing the professionalism of that skill base I referenced earlier, which I don't have, but we have plenty of people within our fundraising function who have that. They are a part of the total story, and we need our services people, we need our childline volunteers and frontline staff to be able to talk clearly about the difference that they're making in a way that inspires people to give money, and doesn't sort of take for granted that they're on its own, their skill is sufficient to achieve what they need to achieve, because without raising the money to do it, they won't be there.
I'm going to have one more question, then I'll hand back to Mark. So you said 4 words there. Everyone is a fundraiser.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that? What does that mean? What does that look like in practice?
Well, I think...
How does it manifest itself in the way, in the culture of the organisation, the way people interrelate with each other, etc.?
Could I just interrupt on that point? This is a thing you possibly didn't know. I was head of fundraising at the YMCA years ago, and obviously had a long history. If you worked at the YMCA at its outset, your first job was to raise your own salary. That was one of the points that they used to engage people, everyone in fundraising. And I've always thought that something like that, where people, you know, work to raise a percentage of their salary, could be a good idea. But sorry, carry on.
So there's a balance, isn't there? Because I really sympathise with that, and where it doesn't work is where you have people in a charity like ours that think they are so brilliant at what they do that, you know, the world owes them a living, and there's that sort of sense of entitlement as opposed to that sense of privilege that we have to be connecting people who want to help with children who need us. So in the culture, I think we need to be humble enough to recognise that together we are the custodians of this mechanism, which is connecting need up with people who want to give. So that's So that's one thing. Everyone being a fundraiser, I do think it's important that I auction off my shirts and that I abseil off the top of KPMG. I didn't know.
Do it safely. Do it safely.
Yeah, when we got a new partnership with KPMG a few years back, in the launch meeting, it was announced that the two chief executives would be abseiling off the top of the headquarters
Did
building.
you know this?
No. So that's something else the fundraising director can do, is try and avoid surprises, because if that had been a parachute jump, I might not have done it. But no, there's something about leading by example, and I agree with you. We have a childhood day in mid-June, and we encourage as many of our staff, employees as possible, to get out there and participate in fundraising, not least so they appreciate what our thousands of community volunteers in NSPCC branch and districts are struggling with day after day after day. So that kind of sense of being in it together, it is really important, but at the same time don't diminish, to use Giles's word, the appreciation either of the specific expertise that fundraisers have in their discipline, or the specific expertise that a brilliant social worker has in delivering therapeutic support to a child who's experienced sexual abuse. So I don't really want them spending large amounts of their time shaking a bucket. We all need to play to our respective strengths and appreciate. So when I say everyone's a fundraiser, everyone appreciates the critical need to raise funds and contribute in their own way. I'd rather have that therapist coming to an evening event and talking about her work, and it will blow people away.
I prefer everyone as a fundraiser, so bear with me. You and I think, have a very similar view about brand. Brand has nothing to do with the logo and the strapline. The brand is to do with the way every single person interacts with the brand.
I agree as well.
Well, all sensible people do. So what that means is that the switchboard operator needs to realise when answering a call that it could be £1 million donor. The staff on reception need to be aware that the person coming through the door could be having a £1,000 gift. So that doesn't mean that they actually go out and fundraise, but it's just that they have in their heads a mindset that everyone's a fundraiser.
And we had at one of our bases up until fairly recently a pensioner couple who would come in, I can't remember if it was every week or every month, with a postal order for £2 to support the NSPCC, well beyond anyone ever realising that postal orders still existed. But that's what they did on that particular day of the week or time of the month. As I say, I can't quite remember, but it was their routine and that they did for children. And when you are in receipt of a gift like that, my goodness, not only does it make you appreciate your supporters, but going back to my heart being in the treasury, it makes you think we'd better spend that £2 wisely.
Please listeners, take careful note of that, because some charities would not even send a thank you to a £2 donor, and I think personally that's shocking, because that £2 donor, he probably thinks they're making, that's their contribution, and they're making a difference, so they should be thanked as much as the £1 million donor. Not given as much time, but
and how many times have we heard people saying, "Oh, well, this is all I've got," or "I don't think this will make a difference."
Yeah.
Well, it absolutely will, and it absolutely does. And actually, if you look at our funding base, it's lots of people giving a little on a regular basis. That is the very best money you can generate, not just because it aggregates to something powerful, but if you can create that predictability of funding, it allows you to run sustained services against it for a period of time, as opposed to whipping everyone up into a frenzy for a short period. We did really well in fundraising terms during the lockdown, because the NSPCC helpline really came into its own, with lots of professionals not having their eyes on children who could be at risk people who saw something terrible happening to a child needed somewhere to go, and the NSPCC helpline was open throughout and was compelling and distinct. So short term, we've raised a lot of money from a lot of causes to support that line, and we helped a lot of children through that really difficult period, and then it sort of slipped away again. So it was good for the moment in time, but compared with having lots of those people committing through and out into the future, dialing up and dialing down is great, and it helps you to do specific things in specific moments of time, but tackling some of these really kind of wicked and long-term issues does need sustained funding and regular gifts, and that's quite a challenge, isn't it? Because I think there's some evidence that more people, especially younger people, are more spontaneous in their giving now than they maybe were in the past.
But I think, I'll hand over to your witness one second, but it seems from what you're saying, one of the main things you're saying, is that we should stop seeing donors as numbers on the database and see them as human beings who want to make a difference.
Definitely.
Okay, Mark.
Yeah, well, a couple of points really from that. Number one was obviously how people give, and that's a very powerful way for us to ascertain how valuable that might donor be. You know, so to get a postal order, you've got to go to the post office. It's a lot of work, and I have not heard of a postal order being given for years.
Yeah.
But we find, for example, you know, for one of our clients, we do a lot of press advertising. 70% of our gifts come with cheques. You know, that's an indicator. And if you get something like that, it's giving you clues about their age and how you should treat them and what might be the appropriate communications. We also get, you know, they're slightly rarer, but the old CAF checks as well, you know, still come through. And that again is another clue that you've got somebody there who is, you know, who is not necessarily professional, but they are a committed charity giver. And it's one point I think that we sometimes forget, that there's soft information in our database as well as hard. But the other point I wanted to ask you, you've been talking about the shirts and the leaping off buildings, and more power to you for those points. But when you're having those conversations, you're sitting down with somebody, I don't know where it might be you've met them at an event, or it might be some sort of presentation or such like. And you know they're quite wealthy, and you know it's you that's got to make the ask.
Yeah.
You know, how do you do that? How do you focus on why they give? How do you bring that up? How do you address that in your conversation?
Yeah. Well, again, I am not the expert in this, but I am so much more confident about doing that, and I wouldn't hesitate to do it now than the Peter Wanless who arrived 11 years ago, who would have felt extremely intimidated by that situation and would have needed a brief from a kind of fundraiser about how to do it. So I think, you know, you get practiced at listening to and asking open questions about people's motivations and what it is that they value. And the difference that they want to make beyond what they're doing in the here and now. So I do it by listening extremely carefully, getting a sense of their motivations of gifts that they have made and differences they've wanted to make in the world, and then seek to relate that to an activity or an impact which the NSPCC is either having now or even better in many cases can't do at the moment, but with this or that aspect of support could become something which we could do with their association and insight, you know, out into the future. So we have, and then again you sort of learn over time from listening to lots of people. Some people want to give you money and never really think about it again, but trust and appreciate that you are the experts who will do something with that. And then there are other people who want to join you in the journey and offer thoughts and opinions and track the difference that they're making, and that may be valuable and it might not be, but I think it's reasonable to be kind of open and engaging about that opportunity than close it down, because ultimately I want, if everyone's going to play their part in keeping children safe, I want the NSPCC to be an active movement of like-minded people who may not agree on very much at all, but are all passionately committed to making a difference to children, as opposed to, and this is no bad thing either, but be a passive conscience for children that people give to and say, thanks very much, I can sleep better at night because I know the NSPCC exists. But if we can get them giving of their money, but also in their whole attitude of mind, back to Giles's thing about everyone a fundraiser, if we can create a culture where everyone sees themselves as playing a part in keeping children safe, then in their day-to-day actions, never mind the money they're giving us, they will also be doing all sorts of small things which will keep children safer than would otherwise be the case.
I know you're in mid-flow, bear with me. There are two things I want to pick up on. One is listening. So many charities that I'm on mystery shopping with, they tell me what they want to tell me. They don't tell me what I want to hear. They don't listen to me. They don't find out about me. And the other word I love is joining us on the journey. I think that's a really powerful concept. If fundraisers could think about donors joining us on the journey, fabulous. But anyway, sorry, I interrupted.
But just to say on that, we're exploring some really big kind of concepts here, and if we were to audit the NSPCC on those two, I think we're good on the second. I think we increasingly understand the first, but there's so many more things that we can be doing all the time to have that deep in every interaction. So, you know, even as we speak, I'm thinking, you know, I know that is correct and that is what I'm seeking to model myself, but the way in which that becomes universal is a fascinating and important challenge.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No worries. The one I was just going to sort of like push you a little further on that. That again, it's going back to that ask. That when you're with that person, are there signs? Are there, you know, what are you doing? Are you waiting for? Are you nudging them to offer, or are you literally saying, we'd like to involve you with a project? Would you be interested in learning more, or would you give, or something along those lines?
Well, it's both of those. I don't think I would find myself in the context of the second without there having been some preparatory kind of conversations and relationship management and stewardship by the fundraising experts. So and it's not always the chief executive's job to do that, but it can be and it should be, and I think it's really important as a CEO you are capable and confident of doing that, which, as I say, when I was recruited 10, 11 years ago, I wouldn't have been, but I needed to learn pretty quickly. So I think both of those scenarios you've described are possible. The closest I can imagine, we said to have a few stories, you know, I around about the same time as I became chief executive of the NSPCC, 23 years after John Major said to me, we should put your name down for the MCC membership, because we were both cricket fans and that's how I got that job with him. My MCC membership came through, and so here I am thinking, oh, do you know what, I'm going to go to the NSPCC and then I'll slip away in the afternoon and I'll go across to Lord's and I'll sit in the pavilion and I'll watch a bit of cricket and I will get balance in my life. And of course what happens is, on the very few occasions I had time to do that, I'd go and sit next to someone and we get talking and you'd ask what I'm doing and I'd say I work at the NSPCC and we'd start talking about cruelty to children, and before I know it I'm in a potential donor supporter kind of conversation and I'm thinking, this is work. but there we are. I think I've recruited 1 or 2 people on the benches of the Lord's Pavilion.
I imagine it's not a bad place to find a few people with a few pairs.
There's a bit of disposable income there,
yes.
I think.
Just changing the subject, I know there have been some ups and downs with fundraising at the NSPCC, as there have been in a lot of charities. I've just seen your video on individual giving in decline. So sometimes you've had to make staff redundant. Is there any sense that with those people that fundraising has failed, that we are having to make cuts because fundraising has not performed as well as it should? That may be a hard question to answer.
I haven't felt that particularly. I have felt it personally. You know, whenever you have to downsize something for financial reasons, you know, I would take personal responsibility for that as a kind of failure for the leadership of the organisation. I wouldn't put it at the door of the fundraisers who hadn't managed to get enough people to ride their bikes from London to Brighton. So it hasn't quite played out like that. But also I have tried to be extremely careful in leading the charity, always to focus on the impact and the difference which we want to make, and to make choices about what it is we do, what it is we enable, and what it is we influence, and how we are most relevant to make our most distinct contribution out into the future. And it's really important that one respects one's past but isn't defined by it. And the NSPCC's success and longevity is a consequence of its ability to reinvent itself over time, to be relevant for different times and different circumstances. So there are brilliant people that I've had to make redundant here, not because they are hopeless, but because the focus of the charity and where it can make its most distinct contribution to connect the supporters up with the children turns out to be somewhere else. And it's not enjoyable, you know, didn't come into the job to do that, but actually leadership is constantly about making decisions about priorities and trying our best to remain nationally significant and locally relevant.
So have you got, obviously we're talking about how you can raise more funds, bigger challenge, talking obviously we've got the new government coming in, you've got various organisations coming together. Are there any plans in place to try to revitalise the fundraising of NSPCC, to actually have a big push, to get back out there?
Yes, so the big existential question for us is the one we touched on earlier, I think, about how do we make ourselves more relevant more of the time to more people. So people who know us, love us, are kind of loyal and supportive and appreciative of us, and that gives us authority and credibility, but the base is too narrow. And if we're going to achieve this ambition to be an active movement for children and to generate relevance and association with many more people, we've got to reframe this debate to connect with many more people. So there's a public engagement ad which if you search NSPCC parenting, you'd find on the website, which doesn't look quite like NSPCC ads of the past, but collects together a whole host of anxieties which we feel as parents from the moment a child is born through to beyond a child is 18, and just draws attention to the fact that as an adult in those circumstances, you are not alone. The NSPCC is here for you, it associates with you, and it aggregates all sorts of bits of advice and support which we have produced that keep children safer than would otherwise be the case, and it's a sort of window into those. Now that's an opportunity, one way in which we can reframe the relevance and the importance of the charity to people who aren't thinking about abused and neglected children at this particular moment in time, but are feeling the pressures and challenges of parenthood and not quite knowing what to do about it. So that's one of the platforms which we're interested in exploring and expanding and thinking really carefully both about, well, there's a number of aspects, aren't there? There's how do we attract people's attention through that messaging? How do we then create really high quality supporter journeys so they don't just click on the website and find a piece of advice in the moment and then think that was nice and go away and forget all about it, but that's the start of a really productive relationship with us. And then how do we monetize an increasing amount of that to secure the future of to sustain and grow the charity's presence into the future. So there's some exciting opportunities and options there that we're in the early stages of development.
And anything for the for those older donors who've got all the money, the 65 pluses who haven't got children, who won't necessarily engage with that, but we know that's where best part of 80% of the national wealth is now.
Yeah, so well, a lot of them are grandparents and have significant children in and young people in their lives, and so that's important. I think the conversation that we're having with government about where are babies, children and young people in the national discourse is really important. So it is a horrible thing that for the first time, I think, ever, we have a generation of adults who are thinking that the prospects for their children are less than what they experienced. Yeah. And I think the next generation beyond feel that even more so. So there's an opportunity, I think, to do some storytelling in this space to pose the question, where are the children in all of this, and to create a kind of platform for their voices to come through. Because one of the most exciting and satisfying parts of this job are the conversations that we have with children and young people themselves, and their ambitions and aspirations and ideas are phenomenal, but just not being heard.
We're coming to the end of our hour, and I think, unless you've got a lot more you want to say, I think that's a fabulous note. What you just said is a fabulous note to end on. So, thank you very much.
I would have one question, one very short question, one question, very short answer. What would be the one piece of advice that you would give to a fundraiser just starting out in their career now?
Well, I kind of feel like I want to say enjoy it, because it's an incredible privilege to be that connection between helping people do something really magnificent and the cause that is in desperate need of support. So yeah, embrace it, get involved, enjoy the privilege, listen and learn from those around you, because there are some remarkable people who kind of work within this discipline and achieve extraordinary things.
Fabulous. I think that's absolutely right. It is a real privilege to do this job, and I agree. Anything else, Giles?
No.
We are going to wrap up.
Perfect.
So, Sir Peter, thank you so much for giving us that hour. It was fascinating, and best of luck with your next steps in your career, and let's hope the NSPCC goes from strength to strength. So thank you.
I asked Tracy, your PA as I kind of lived. Is he going to retire or move on to something else? And she said, "Oh, he hasn't made up his mind, but I don't think he's going to retire."
I really like the framing at the end there about the next steps in career. I'm much more comfortable with that. So
Excellent.
thank you.
Well, thank you. I'll never say goodbye. And thank you for watching as well. Thank you.